Okay, good morning. Welcome to Senate Economic Development, Housing and General Affairs. We are starting with the Department of Labor in our third day of committee activity. Feels like the third week already. Commissioner Harrington, it's great to have you and your team. Welcome back in person. I think it's also been a while since we had a chance to do that. I think the three of you know most of us. You may or may not know Senator Harrison. So I don't know if Senator Harrison, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Good morning. I'm representing Windham County. I live in Brattleboro. Happy to be here.
Well, and we have Senator Brock and Senator Cummings, who are not necessarily early birds, but I'm sure they'll be in here any minute.
Yeah, not a problem. So if you're...
The only other context I wanted to add for those who are here is we did receive a letter from Vermont Legal Aid with their comments on progress made with the Department of Labor. I told the commissioner he could choose how much or how little he wanted to address that. I think things like the IT system are things we had questions about anyway, progress there, but we can save that for a more in-depth discussion when you have a written response, or if you want to address it in the hour that you have.
So for the record, Michael Harrington, Commissioner for the Department of Labor. Happy to be back. It's nice to be in person. So thank you.
It's good to have you.
Thank you. Hello.
Hello. Sorry.
No, not a problem, Senator. So we're just doing introductions. You didn't miss anything. I've been with the department since 2017, first as the deputy commissioner, then as the interim commissioner, and then was permanently appointed in June of 2020. And with me today, I have Cameron Wood, who you may know as our unemployment insurance director. He also is now serving as our policy and legislative affairs director. So he'll retain both of those titles from a political appointment perspective, but we do have an associate director of UI who's been in UI for a long time, and she runs the day-to-day operations. I also have Matt Barowitz with us, who I'm sure all of you are familiar with, but if you're not, you will become very familiar with Matt over the coming weeks. Matt is our chief economist, but also runs our labor market and economic development division in terms of overseeing jobs data and occupational data. So you'll hear from him probably numerous times. And then just for the sake of time, knowing that there may be a lot that the committee itself wants to cover or questions that people have. So I'm happy to give a quick rundown. A couple of things I was going to highlight will, I think, touch on aspects that legal aid had in their letter. So we can address some of those as well. And then if we want to jump into questions, we can do that. Great. So first off, I'll just start by passing this around. I've got more copies here, but this just gives a quick rundown of the department. I figured a one sheet for maybe the new members. It gives our 4 divisions. It also highlights the wage and hour unit, which is a statutory program that I think is critical. Oh, yeah.
So one's on cardstock.
Did I get the fancy one?
You got the fancy one.
And then it gives again, as most of you are very familiar, but it just gives a very high level of the department. The department sits at the cabinet level with the governor, like many other agencies and other departments. We operate our workforce development division, our unemployment insurance program, the labor market information division, workers' compensation and safety. And under safety are things like BOSHA, Project WorkSafe, passenger tramway. And then again, I highlighted the wage and hour unit because they're really charged with labor protections under the law for employees, especially around unpaid wages predominantly. It gives a breakdown of our funding in terms of look at how much we receive in federal versus general fund, special fund, and interdepartmental fund funding. Obviously, we've been predominantly federally funded for a long time. I will say that there has been a recent shift in that breakdown just in the past 2 years, as you can imagine. So I would say our percentage at one point was as high as 85 to 86% federally funded. You can see that that has changed, and that's predominantly because during the pandemic, there were additional funds through the general fund that were allocated to the department to cover some operational components, as well as some additional funds for ongoing workforce development efforts. And then the statewide map there on the bottom left just shows the fact that we have a number of regional offices around the state. The green ones are essentially what we consider our hub locations. Again, they cover all of the state, and then we've had some small satellite locations. Those aren't always marked with a physical space. Most of the time they are, but sometimes it's a partnership we have where we have staff there on a regular basis, but it might be a space we share with CCB or work out of a library or something like that. But those are the communities or areas where we provide direct services.
So, Michael, there's a huge desert here in Springfield and White River Junction where I thought we had hubs.
Yeah, I mean, so this is a general representation. We don't have a hub there, we have offices there. So we have a Springfield office, we have a White River Junction office. The White River Junction office literally has, for as long as I've been with the department, only had 2 staff people in it.
Yeah, it's pretty
and we have a rule that we don't have people staff an office by themselves. In most cases, you get one call out that closes an office for a day, and we shift staff around. So we, again, are looking at other ways that we can maybe not own, operate in our own siloed office, but be partnered with another organization or institution in that area. So then we don't have to worry about one person calling out and having to close an office.
Do you have a good example of that?
Like where we have partnered?
Yeah.
Sometimes, so what we've been looking at for a little while has been partnering with Voc Rehab because we serve some of the same individuals. So it's in Bennington, Vermont, where it is one of our larger offices, but we do share a space with Voc Rehab. So it's been a great tag team effort because we're able to share resources and supports and make sure that there's more continuity when the client comes in. But then we're also looking at in Springfield at one point, for a long time, we're not in a state office building. We had looked to move to potentially a state office building, but also looking for space with CCB, right? So again, that would be another potential type of partnering.
But right now they're in the state office building, aren't they?
They are, we are not. So we're in a Springfield office. We had, again, more. So what ends up happening is, and I didn't put it on the sheet, but I'm assuming most agencies and departments are struggling with the same thing based on what I've heard. I mean, we run anywhere between a 20 to 30% vacancy rate at any given time. So coming out of the pandemic, we were just decimated. A lot of turnover, a lot of churn. Matt can talk about what that looks like at the statewide level.
I think all of us have heard it.
Yeah, so part of what we're running into is how do we keep these offices open and running with the limited staff we have. So Springfield is one of those where it can be open and then it could easily, if we've got a couple people out on FMLA and we've got one person out who calls in sick, that may close the office and then we have to shift staff around. They either work remote, like telework, or they might go from the Springfield office down to the Brattleboro office for the day and work out of the Brattleboro office.
So if I could just call upon this map isn't to represent, because one of the things we'll get to at some point is our one stop, our one stop. This whole notion of going to one place regionally where you'd have your workforce development help, you get UI help, you get anything with touch of the department, like, and those are not these.
Correct. So, I mean, we have one federally certified one stop, and that
In
is our Burlington office. I will also tell you, our foot traffic, like literally dropped through the floor after the pandemic. So again, a lot of these, so what we've been trying to do is it's really been a shift of philosophy where staff have traditionally been able to sit in the office, open the door, and our clients come to us. And we have changed our methodology. So we have certain days and hours when they can walk in, but often our staff are out in the community trying to find clients. So they're working with other partner agencies. They might be, we have what we call labor on location. So they might go to a library or another place where there are a grouping of potential clients. And then we're also doing more direct outreach. So you probably saw last year, like we had some of our job fairs and outreaches were at baseball games across the state. So you get 4,000 people going to a baseball game in Burlington. We are now able to at least shake hands with most of those people and try to see if we can provide direct services.
Are you tracking metrics of success? Maybe that's in that.
Yeah, so again, it's a question of what is success. So we do
Yeah.
track like how many people attend a job fair, how many employers attend. We have rough numbers on like how many hires came out of a job fair. We do most of our program, and I was going to get to this, but the challenge we run into is that right now workforce development, there's all the things we would like to do, and then there's what we're required to do under the federal government. And so what we end up struggling with is like new initiatives, innovative thinking. They don't always fit into the federal box that they like to put us in. So, you know, we have a number of metrics we track for the federal government, for the U.S. Department of Labor. So most of our funding is all based on enrollment in programs. So it's not just enough to have a connection with somebody. We have to try to get them enrolled. And you hate to boil it down to numbers and dollars when you're talking about people. But that's where most of our federal funding for workforce development comes from, is through enrollments in our programs.
I mean, numbers are helpful too, right?
Yes,
I mean, I think if the numbers I've heard are correct, we have 24,000 open jobs in the state. And, you know, are you coordinating across other agencies to really tackle that number sector by sector right now?
We are, I mean, I would say it's a little bifurcated just because, you know, programs get designed based on where the money is and where the resources are. So it's not as maybe braided or interlocked as we would like. I think the State Workforce Development Board is a key role in convening those partners and talking about statewide strategies. And I'm looking at Senator Clarkson because she sits on the board.
Yeah, but as we only meet quarterly, it's sort of a little.
And I think there's a desire to make the board, again, much more of a driver around identifying priority sectors, identifying kind of a uniform or cohesive approach to how we tackle getting people into jobs in particular sectors. Again, our enrollments, like many, are very low because the number of people who actually need services is very low.
Actually, the number of people who need services statewide in terms of everything that we know people need services on is high.
Well, again, when we
from
talk
mental health to trauma to all that.
But when we talk about jobs and joblessness, you know, the number of unemployed Vermonters and the number of unemployed Vermonters collecting benefits is historically low.
Yes, and so that is true. But that service, but not services, as I think we all think.
Correct. Yeah, and I was thinking more about job seekers looking for jobs.
Right, and to follow up on her 24,000, how many are on UI?
Currently.
How many are what?
So
on UI, on
so
unemployment.
I'll throw a caveat out there because I like to help Matt out here. So there's a misnomer or misconception. There's the number of people who are unemployed, and that makes up our unemployment rate in the state. Yeah. So the current number of unemployed Vermonters is 8,400. And the number of people actually collecting benefits does not play into the unemployment rate. So the number of people collecting benefits is 4,000. Again, it's about half the number of the, little less than half the number of the actual number of unemployed Vermonters. It is, this is our busiest season in UI, November through March, because of seasonal layoffs. And most companies decide to downsize, if they're going to downsize during that period as well. But also, just so for context, 4,000 is actually below our average for this time of year. So in a traditional non-pandemic year, it wouldn't be uncommon to see roughly 6,000 people on benefits.
Senator Brown.
But I've seen various statistics on number of folks who have left the workforce over time, ranging from 24 to 28,000. Where did they go?
So I'll do my best to represent Matt, but I'm going to ask Matt to come up here. The number one contributing factor is they aged out of the workforce in one shape or another. Most of them were beyond retirement age, so they were staying because they loved their job. It was easy and when it became complicated with the pandemic, they used that opportunity to exit the workforce. Many were at retirement age and many were close to retirement age, and a lot of places also look from a financial perspective offer early retirement. So there are many other factors. I'll let Matt jump in, but most of it is around retirements.
Yes, good morning. Matt Fairwitz, Director, Economic and Labor Market Information with the Vermont Department of Labor. Right now, relative to before the pandemic, our labor force is about 20,000 people less than where it was. So we have recovered. For a while, we were 30,000 down, but we did see some positive re-entrance back into the labor force over 2022. At least that's what our best information is. I've seen national studies that estimate about 75% of the labor force contraction is related specifically to demographics. So if you line up the baby boomer generation against the calendar, the leading edge of the baby boomer turned 65 in 2011. That means the leading edge of the baby boomers turned 75 in 2021. You know, if I had some nice pictures and graphs, I could point where you can see this this trend that happens, because the recession that happened in 2007 was a bad one, right? Where housing prices, stock prices, they all went in the tank. And if you were planning on retiring then, you'd say, whoa, this isn't a good time. I'm going to stay in the labor force. So 2009, 10, we actually had this kind of like pent up demand for retirements until the economy improved. However, this recession, housing prices, asset prices, stock portfolios through the roof. So if you were close to retirement now, a lot of people said, this is going to be my exit, you know? And so, though we focus on demographics a lot as it relates to labor force, I think it's really important to kind of look at that kind of grab bag of catch-all concepts that make up the other portions. And what we're seeing is that a lot of times that is people with less than a college education. That's a population that typically gets hit hardest during economic downturns. And that is one of the populations that really hasn't recovered or returned to the labor force. So when we talk about downward pressure in the labor force outside demographics, that's a population I really zoom in on. And that can present itself in a number of different socioeconomic characteristics, race, ethnicity as well, but particularly people with less than a 4-year college education. There are other indications that some people have gone down to 1 income earner instead of 2 in the household. But you know, I think from just a big statement, I really look at the people with less than a college education. That's where they're showing a tremendous amount of that they haven't returned to the labor force as they were pre-pandemic.
Well, one of the major issues that I think is a concern for this committee is how do we replenish the labor force? And that I know isn't a direct function of the Department of Labor, but I'm wondering if the department has any thoughts along those lines.
So it's definitely going to be a joint effort. I think the traditional, we need to make sure we're training and retaining those folks moving through high school, coming out of college. So there's a big effort on making sure we've got the right training programs in place to make sure we have the skills to meet our employer needs. There's the marketing and recruitment aspect. So some of that is with us. Most of it is at the Agency of Commerce when we talk about like outward marketing and recruitment of people or incentivizing people to move to our state, which you've heard the governor talk about as well.
Which this committee is pioneered.
Yes, correct. It came out of this committee, the relocation incentive program, right? So, and a number of others. So looking at untapped markets of individuals. So I'm curious, and I haven't really had a deep conversation with Matt about this either, but eventually we'll see some correction probably coming through this, whenever this next economic downturn occurs. The number of available jobs or businesses looking to grow may contract as well, just based on historical knowledge. So the demand for workers will be less. That's not a solution, but I think we're keeping a close eye on that. So I think, again, it's making sure that people who are here stay here, and then making sure that we're also replenishing, or I attribute it or equate it to a leaky bucket, right? So what are the factors that are causing people to leave the workforce? So it also may be other challenges. I'm sure we'll talk a lot in here about things like childcare and other barriers that prevent housing that prevent people from either relocating to Vermont or prevent them from returning to the workforce, right? I have no doubt that some of the folks Matt talks about in terms of where they've gone to a single income household is because one of the wage earners needed to make a very difficult decision to leave the workforce in order to care for a loved one, care for a child, because they couldn't either find childcare or couldn't afford childcare.
Is there, and I feel like we always just want Matt to stay in our room all the time, but anyone can answer this question. Are there things that make Vermont's labor issues unique in the rest of the country? It sounds like this sped up the demographic shift nationally. Everyone's struggling with childcare and housing, but are we a unique outlier in any of those areas or others?
That's a great question, and I'm not 100% sure on that. I've tried to do some thinking on this. What makes this economic recovery from the COVID recession so different is that the competition for labor is really heightened across the country. And even like, as opposed to what was happening in 2007 through 2010, where it was like all urban. It was urban-based economic recovery, and the rural parts of the country are hollowing themselves out as everyone migrated into urban settings for opportunities. We're not seeing that in this last economic downturn. And so it is just like carte blanche. And I think what changes it is that now I think a lot more states are in tune with it. And so the competition for labor, it's not just like, it's not just Vermont trying to recruit people from California. It's like the other 48 states trying to recruit people from California in addition to Vermont. And also the international climate is very different. So historically, the answer for the United States is that we're going to change our immigration policies. We're going to welcome in new workers. The US, for many people, is no longer the primary destination of choice. And we're seeing that Canada is taking measures right now saying that, we're going to prevent people from out of the country buying houses in Canada. So like what I'm hearing in the latest news. So, so it's going to be interesting to see, but I don't think there's, so what makes it different?
Two things that I've heard. One is we certainly went into the pandemic with an older workforce.
Yes.
So that made us more susceptible, I think, to the challenges of the pandemic. It also makes it harder for us to recover because many of those people aren't coming back to the workforce after the pandemic. The other thing that's pretty unique to Vermont that I've heard, and this is just anecdotal from my counterparts in other states, many other states are having to incentivize people to go back to work, right? So they left the workforce and they're still at prime working age and they are having a hard time returning to the workforce. We know from our numbers that that's not the case here in Vermont. I mean, certainly there are people we're always trying to reemploy, but when you look at other states, our unemployment rate is extremely low. The number of people, like they're having to think of incentives not to get people to relocate, just to go back to work. And we have not necessarily had that same situation.
So Maine, as we know, has a similar demographic. How much, Matt, do you work with the Maine numbers? Because they would be interesting to compare, to go to Keisha's question about, who would, are they having a similar, my guess is it's almost exactly the same picture. Is that
100%? I just co-presented with the LMI director in the state of Maine. CCV put together a New England-based forum, and so I invited Maine and Connecticut. So the three of us co-presented all together. And looking at Maine statistics, it's fascinating because I can speak and interchange Maine and Vermont, where our labor force participation rate used to be very high in Vermont. We used to talk about it all the time. We had a highly educated population. Our labor force participation was higher than the US. COVID happens, it drops down significantly. And then it's just kind of like slowly climbed back, but basically plateaued. The growth is no longer happening. And Maine is the same. Most states like New Hampshire and other states, they're continuing to see a rise, even though they might not be back to where they were pre-pandemic as far as labor force participation. But Maine is that same where it just looks, very static as far as labor force participation is concerned. Again, demographically, race and ethnicity, age, very similar
Yeah,
population.
So it was interesting that, and Connecticut, how's Connecticut doing?
They're a little different as far as the New England state. They've
Yeah.
always been kind of an odd state. I've never really got my hands around Connecticut's economy.
Well, half of it skews to New York and half of
Yes.
it's centered in Connecticut.
And they have some large defense contractors, is my understanding in there, which can really boom and bust them based on who gets contracts.
Speaking of immigration, we're hearing from newer parts of Vermont that have accepted Afghan refugees that they want more of that. Now they have the systems in place. They're not as a Brattleboro as a great example. Are you all participating in more kind of refugee resettlement oriented labor?
So we took a pretty heavy role in the last year and a half. So we actually have foreign labor program manager within the Workforce Development Division. And we've assisted both Brattleboro, and I'm never going to remember the acronyms, but there's one in the Chittenden County area, there's one in Brattleboro, and then Brattleboro is also helping Vermont, or for Bennington, which I'm from Bennington. So my mom was actually one of the individuals that was helping with the resettlement of some of the Afghan refugees. So that actually gave me a very unique perspective into the challenges they were facing. So we've given some significant funding to like the Brattleboro Development Credit Corporation, as well as the organization that's in the Chittenden area. So we are involved. It's interesting because there is a certain number of benefits and entitlements they receive from the federal government through that comes out of the office, the relocation office at the Agency of Human Services here. So they're entitled to a certain amount of benefits first, and they have to use those benefits first before they shift to using like our WIOA benefits. But some of the items that we're able to help with are probably pretty unique to these types of populations. So obviously things like translation services is a big one, but we can also help. So if, for instance, this was a new one to me, if someone is looking to become employed and they need dentures, right? We can actually help cover part of the cost for them to actually go see a healthcare professional to receive, dentures, or something like professional clothing, right? So if they are doing interviews and they need new professional clothing, we can help.
And that's all federal.
Well, it comes through our WIOA.
We certainly aren't affording dentures for the rest of our population.
So those are, but again,
I'm okay with somebody getting dentures. I'm thrilled
Somebody's getting them.
So it all comes out of they get a certain amount allotment of funds and benefits when they transition here, and then when those run out, then we're able to help with, things like if they're going through a training program and they need to acquire their own tool set, we can help cover the cost of tools, things of that nature. So,
And how about training?
oh, training too.
Because I was going to say that's one of the big pluses.
Yeah, so that's I was kind of counting that as an obvious one, but probably I shouldn't have assumed that. But things like on-the-job training, apprenticeships is a big one. Other work experience or work-based learning efforts. There certainly the challenge has been really the limited language proficiency.
Yeah.
So there's a big barrier there, and the lack of translators, right? So it's like there's already the gap, and then we don't have enough resources to fill the gap. The other one we see are things like needing to learn how to drive, and so they can get to work, right? Because there isn't always public transportation available. But a unique service that we can also work with and provide some funding for is if like if there's a group of new Americans working out of a single employer and they all tend to live in the same area, we can actually help with coordinating regular work transportation for them. So we can't do one-offs, but like, let's say there were 10 or 15 people living in a housing complex that all work for the same employer, we could then work on providing transportation.
Senator Harrison.
Yeah, that's great. And I'm familiar with those programs in Brattleboro, and it really made a difference. And there was something that expired at the end of December. So I don't know if that was the program that you were
I don't know if
funding.
it was through us or not.
That's
It
really
may have been out of
important.
human services too.
Right. And just in public transportation, a nice thing about this is that if we are able to provide services to the new Americans, then the existing people can also ride that. So it helps them just meet people, and it helps the employers too. Is there ever a situation where you get funding from the employers to help sponsor that?
Not to us directly. So typically.
Or where the program gets funded?
Yeah, so we don't receive funding from employers. Employers invest through things like apprenticeship programs. The big thing for us is there has to be a job at the end of the tunnel, right? So a lot of people like to offer work experience or some type of life experience, but there's no guaranteed job at the end. So it's really important for us in our federal programs that if you're going to have a work experience, that there's a job waiting for the individual at the end.
Right.
And that's the key around apprenticeship, right? So they actually are an apprentice with an employer, and there's actually also a wage and career ladder that has to occur at the end. So they go through their hours, they graduate from the program, and they might automatically go from $14 an hour to $16 an hour, or something like that. So there has to be a wage progression upon completion, and there has to be an employment after the completion.
Okay, and that's to use your federal dollars.
Federal and state. So the
Okay.
state does fund some of our apprenticeship work, and then there's also federal apprenticeship dollars as well.
We talk a lot about upskilling and training, but I keep hearing again and again, really basic skills, ELL and driver's ed are huge stumbling blocks, and they seem to fall through the cracks of a lot of different jurisdictions. We heard about foster kids, and they can't get driver's ed through Agents of Education. They need a car from AHS to make this work. Are there any things like that where if we put a small one-time fund in to get a car or to jumpstart an ELL program, we could?
It'd probably be worth a
Difference.
bigger conversation, but it highlights what I was talking about, which is we're really handicapped because so much of our workforce development staff, and we've had this conversation with Chair Marcotte as well.
Yeah.
Because it has to fit within the box of what the federal expectations are of the program,
Right.
which really does not leave much room for creative thinking. And if you can imagine, the federal government doesn't focus a lot on creative thinking.
That's not fair.
But
It's just big,
it's big, it is big.
which is a challenge.
And so I think those are the opportunities where if we can find funding or even additional resources so that we can provide that assistance,
Yeah.
right? So like, again, 80 something or 82% of our workforce development division is federally funded. So when you
Right.
think about the fact that there's really only, 18% of the funds are actually, state, that also means only 18% of our staff or staff time can actually go towards statewide initiatives. So that's where we've talked a lot with other committees and probably this one as well in the past about how do we make ourselves more nimble and ability to meet Vermont's needs as opposed to what the federal government determines.
We're clear on that.
Yeah.
Sarah's been very clear.
Yes, yeah. And so Sarah Buxton is our workforce development director. She's a former legislator, and that she'll be before this committee, I'm sure, numerous times. So happy to have her come in to talk in more detail. Do you want me to hit on anything else before or keep going?
Do you want to do IT before we?
Sure.
Yeah.
I think what I want to just hit on is when I look across the department, when we talk about priorities, a big one is modernization. We all think of UI, but the Department of Labor is actually going through 4 major modernization efforts. So UI is our largest. We're in the middle of modernizing our workers' compensation system. we're also in the middle of modernizing our workforce development system. And these are IT systems.
Okay.
And then we're also working through the Agency of Administration to upgrade our, we have to have a dual system in our accounting and fiscal office because of the federal requirements. So we have a program called FARS, which is like Federal Accounting and Reconciliation System or something like that. And so there's a massive amount of time that is spent truing up the FARS system with the state's accounting system at the end of each quarter and the end of each year. So the state's going through a modernization, which means we're also trying to get on with that one system.
Okay.
So we have those 4 projects. The thing I'll say about modernization, we actually will have a report coming to the legislature in the next week or 2 from myself and the Secretary of ADS. I would say we're on track. I know there's a concern from legal aid and the legal aid letter about our timing, but most large scale IT projects take anywhere from 12 to 18 months. In some cases, extremely large or complex programs can take 2 years or more to go through requirements gathering, drafting the RFP, putting out the RFP, going through selection, and then negotiating a contract. So I know legal aid is concerned about the fact that in March, we put out the RFP and it hasn't gone anywhere. That's not necessarily accurate. There's been a lot of work and negotiation that's been going on behind the scenes. So we have to go through and score what, in some cases, what was the largest response we got? It was like
document-wise,
yeah, it was like
800,000 pages.
Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes,
to the record?
for the record, Cameron Wood, I'm the Policy and Legislative Affairs Director for the department, also the Unemployment Insurance Director. The largest RFP we got, I think, was close to 1,000 pages.
Right, so there's a massive amount of review that has to happen. One thing, and I think many are familiar, unemployment insurance is probably right up there with healthcare when we talk about complexity, because you're talking about eligibility, and you're not just talking about eligibility once, you're talking about someone has to certify they're eligible for each week they receive benefits. And so there's a whole number of federal checks and balances that have to happen. So we have put out the RFP, we've received the proposals, we've gone through and reviewed and scored the proposals. We've gone back out to the top vendors to ask for what's known as a BAFO or best and final offer to see whether or not we can reduce some of the cost on those. And then we will come together and identify who we believe the top vendor is. And that'll probably happen in the next month. The best and final offers are due back on January 19th. So I would say within the next 2 weeks or so following that, we'll make selection. And then we start the actual negotiation process on the agreement, which is it's a $35 million project. So it's going to be an extensive contract negotiation. So again, we're well within the time frame for contracting through the state, but it does take a long time. And then you're talking about probably another 3 years of development and launch after the contract gets signed.
Right.
I'm happy to come back. We talk about it another day, but so I sit as the chair-elect for the National Association of State Workforce Agencies. Their priorities are workforce and UI. And so they have a UI integrity center and data center. So they do a lot with UI technology. So I've asked them, they're going to provide me some of the maps that just illustrate the fact that, before the pandemic, there might have been, 5 to 7 states at any given time looking to modernize their system. There's something like 28 states in some way, shape, or form are going through modernization right now. And there's like 5 legitimate vendors, right?
Right.
So, it's not like there's a sea of providers. There's probably 5 legitimate vendors that have proven products on the market.
Senator Clarkson.
But given how long we have been on this modernization track, we must be one of the oldest IT systems in the country. I mean,
I'm trying to think of.
It's about 35 years old at this point.
Oh, well, so it first went live in June 7th of 19 we turned something like 50 in 2020 during the pandemic.
Yeah, okay, so
And-
my point is, we should be at the top of the list. I realize we have very few vendors who can
Yeah.
actually do this work, but surely, after discussing this for the 20 years I've been in the legislature, this is my 19th year. This has been on top of the docket for so long. Randy, as our
Yeah.
head of our IT, I mean, I understand, we understand all
Well,
those problems, but
there's-
surely we must be at the top of the list.
But there is no list, right? So it's whoever's out of the gate and contracts with the vendor first.
Right,
Well,
but
the issue
surely
though,
we're there.
as I recall, the department came to the Joint IT Oversight Committee with its planned timetable. We
Yeah.
approved a certain amount of money to start with. Where are you relative to what you told IT, the JTOC, that you'd be at this point?
Yeah, I'd have to go back and, because ADS is leading the project. they were the
Senator
ones
Harrison might not know what JTOC is.
A Joint Information Technology Oversight.
Thank you.
So I'll leave that to ADS. I will, one of the things that we decided to do, so at one point, there was phase one money that we got. And the idea was to kick off phase one. We started going through that RFP process. When we were going through the RFP process, which again can take a while, we actually, the legislature also decided to fund the whole project, right? So that actually, instead of doing phases where we could end up with two vendors, we decided one, we'll get more people to bid and probably a more competitive cost bid. So we reissued the RFP for the full, I think the first round one was like 3.5 million. So we reissued the bid for 33.5 million. And so that we could compete with some of these larger states that are offering 40, 50, and $60 million to upgrade their systems.
I mean, and Wendy is a new member and the rest of us, I mean, when you talk about how creative we can be and the challenges the feds have, our creativity, quite honestly, as you know, has been hampered by our inability to have a modern IT
Yes,
system.
yeah.
So we have tried, as you know, to be fairly creative, particularly during the pandemic and now going forward, particularly about UI, but on many of the issues that touch IT.
Yeah.
And our creativity has been hampered by
But there are many.
big time.
There are many checks and balances in the contracting process, right? And so some of them are state requirements, some are requirements that have been put in by prior legislatures. So there are I probably shouldn't say this, but we are one of the more complex states when it comes to contracting. So we move exceptionally slow. And we have many hoops to jump through when we do large scale contracting. I'm not saying that that's to our detriment. It probably saves us a lot of money in the end because we do a lot of checks and balances prior to contracting, but it slows us down. And so there are
Our
other.
concern, I think, more than anything else, is whether or not there is an appropriate sense of urgency.
Yeah.
We know as we look
Right.
at some of what happened during the pandemic, that we've had some disasters and near disasters. And there is a major concern that this is going to fall over on its side.
So, I mean, there's no one who would love to see a more
Right.
modern system than the people
Than the
at the
three of
Department of
you.
Labor,
Three-
right? You know, but
But I think our
I-
job is to keep the
Yes.
fire lit.
Absolutely, and I totally respect and understand that. So
So-
we're happy to come back and talk about that at any time. I would bring ADS and Agency of.
But I think
Services.
it's worth doing.
Yeah.
I think it is worth doing because
Yeah.
this is such a critical system.
Yeah.
And we don't know if we're going to have another major problem like we had in the pandemic tomorrow.
Right.
And will the department and its systems be able to react?
Right.
And is there at least one person still alive who knows the code?
Yeah,
Yes.
Yeah.
There is there is one person.
Save them.
Well,
And they can't retire.
yeah,
That-
and you know this, and I'm more sharing just for general knowledge, you know, it's one thing to say, hey, the system was built using COBOL code. It's another thing to say, and there's somebody who actually knows how it was designed, because they also have to understand how unemployment insurance works. They can't just pull a COBOL coder off the street and say, now do all these things with the system. The only other thing I wanted to touch on, and we can keep going, I know we've got a few more minutes,
Well,
but
Matt's gotta-
when we talk about priorities, you know, it came up in the legal aid letter, but I just want to articulate here on the record, you know, equal opportunity, accessibility, equity, non-discrimination, those have been priorities for the department even prior to the pandemic. We are looking at a number of different ways. We've made great strides in our workforce development division to ensure we're meeting all those marks. Our focus has been on, but is also turning towards unemployment insurance to say, how are we ensuring that we are doing everything we can to ensure that we're providing our UI services in an equitable and accessible way. The department has developed a new position called an Equal Opportunity and Accessibility Manager, which we're actually in the process of recruiting for right now and hiring. So again, that a lot of the things that were articulated in the legal aid letter will actually be the responsibility of this individual. We are one of the only states that doesn't have a dedicated EO manager. So that was an initiative we started talking about early on. It's just, again, when the pandemic hit, kind of, there's a requirement, the things you have to do, the things you'd like to do. And this falls probably somewhere in the middle. And so we've been moving that process forward. We've also had a lot of turnover in the department. So, you know, we were working on a communications plan in UI for making sure we're not only offering the services, but making sure the claimants and individuals are aware that the services exist. So part of it is offering the services. The rest is also making sure there's enough awareness out there. So we have a communications plan underway. Our communications coordinator actually left and took another job. So we're in a search for a new communications coordinator. Actually a couple, one in workforce development as well. So there's, just so you know, those remain and are also top priorities for us this year, and we'll be focusing heavily on those.
We would like to meet that person when they're hired. I think it's before May.
Sure.
From what I'm hearing you say, I mean, it's not an afterthought. Who the people entering the workforce, the demographics are, you know, foreign-born, people of color, people who want a safe, diverse workplace. So I'm glad to hear that's a priority.
I'd also highlight too, there's specific money that all states got. They have to apply for them, but as long as the application is approved, we went through one round of application. We're going through another one with the federal government for an equity grant. So some of that money will go towards general equity work in UI, but also any enhancements to our new system to make it more accessible and equitable. There's also some additional focuses just across the entire department around equity and accessibility.
That's great.
Yeah, no.
Just a little question. Do you or can you do exit interviews, or are exit interviews done in this
For our
day?
staff?
As
So-
many people as you could
Yeah,
collect,
so
right? 'Cause that would be good data.
So one of the other priorities, it's actually the next one on the list, was within the department, we've also set out and embarked on a mission of improving the overall culture within the department. And we established a new purpose statement and principles. So part of that process, we're doing not only we can't do intensive exit interviews for everybody, especially right now because the turnover is so high, but we offer some direct exit interviews, but all departing staff also receive a link to an exit interview survey that they can take. And then we also started for new staff, what we're calling stay interviews, where members of our senior leadership team are actually, anybody that's within the first 90 to 120 days are receiving, having a one-on-one interview with a member of the senior leadership team that's not their director. And so they are, just asking them, how's it going? Do you have all the tools you need? Are you getting the direction you need? Again, part of the leaky bucket is we have people who are leaving and trying to stymie the turnover that we're seeing.
Just to tag on to that, because I was going to ask you, how's morale?
Yeah.
Because you had a real morale challenge in DOI.
Morale is, so morale across the state, based on the most recent employee engagement survey is low in the department. It's extremely low.
Yeah.
I think we are, the pandemic may be over, but the crushing factors that came with that have not subsided. So with a high vacancy rate, an extreme number of audits that are going on. I mean, I think in the past year, Cam, how many audits have we gone through, would you say?
In the past 2 years for unemployment insurance, I'd say we've gone through at least 10.
Intensive audits.
And those are initiated by whom?
Anywhere from the required state audits, the auditor's office, or the federal government. So like just in the last 2 weeks, we launched one audit and we got a request from the Office of Inspector General at USDOL to launch another audit. So again, it's like every month or so, we're getting new audit requests.
Are any of those audits related to improper payments or fraud?
Most of the audits that we have had with the Office of Inspector General and with USDOL are either directly related to fraud or have a fraud component. Yes, sir.
And do you at this point have a number through the most recent year for which you have statistics of the amount of improper payments or the amount of fraud in dollars?
I have information that I can share. I can take up your last 6 minutes with it. It is a very in-depth conversation.
We could also share it by memo and then have a follow-up.
Probably given the time that we have, sharing by memo, this is a first step, but that's an important piece. We've had discussions before about the issue, and I know the last time that we talked particularly about fraud that was related to that big blip that caused you to shut down. The department did not have any numbers, was not able to quantify to us where that stood.
Yes.
We also looked at the issue of improper fraud over time. It was something like a $55 million amount over a 10-year period that was of concern that we talked about a year and a half ago. And I'd like to know where that has evolved since the end of that particular period as to what the trend is. We had some consulting work done focused on that entire issue, and debate on the quality of that work. That's another issue as to, well, what's happened since then? And are we improving in terms of improper payments and the identification of fraud? This is what particular concern to me.
Yes, sir. And we can pull together some detailed information and share. I will tell you that we are seeing continued significant improvement in that area.
Just for general knowledge, so there are a couple of different types of fraud that you'll hear us talk about. One is claimant fraud, which is an intentional act by a claimant to misrepresent a material fact in order to obtain benefits. So they might not report wages that they earned in order to receive benefits on top of the wages they earned. The big one that we all are familiar with, I think, over the last year is identity theft fraud. So stolen identities from some other data breach, not related to the department. So again, Equifax had a large data breach. A lot of that data ended up on the black market and was used by what we call bad actors to file for benefits in a number of states. And then there's some additional components of fraud. You'll hear the term improper payments. Improper payments does not always directly relate to fraud, because improper payments could be that, again, we just improperly paid somebody based on, they weren't doing it maliciously, right? Like more information came more information came to light, or, something happened within the department where we issued a determination, that determination got reversed on appeal. So improper payments can be overpayments of benefits or underpayment of benefits. So again, just, we'll cover all of those, I think, and try to articulate that.
I was very insulted that you turned down my claim for my 2 weeks of work in the Alaskan fish hatch.
I heard about that.
I think you should have changed it.
And just for those listening at home, that was
that was
a
not
worrisome fraud
actually,
experience.
It would, no, I was more concerned that whoever filed it had my social security
Right.
number and my birth date. And there's all kinds of things on every one of my bank accounts.
well, and
No,
I mean,
that's a pain in the neck. I mean,
so
that
you're
was
all
a
aware,
huge
I mean,
problem.
former Governor Howard Dean filed for benefits 10 times, under 10 different social security numbers, but use the same name,
Yeah.
right? I mean, again, that's not,
It was out there.
that was fraud, but, the harder part is probably ensuring people that their information is getting used to file for benefits, and we're catching probably 99% of it right now, because we're literally going through and auditing each claim. And we have a whole fraud team, which we've never had before. But in most cases, there's a concern that the data is coming from us, right? So that they believe that our data is getting leaked out there, and that's how people are filing for benefits. And we have to reassure them that, there's been no data breach at the Department of Labor, right? This is just somebody using your social, your date of birth, your mother's maiden name, and all of that history that's out there to file, probably not just with us, right? They're probably filing in 50 other states.
But that also is an issue regarding the data modernization, because
Yeah.
one of the issues of data modernization is to build in tools
Yeah.
to catch these kinds of
Right.
things that would go through otherwise in our antiquated.
Yeah, so it's tools to catch it when it gets in there. It's tools like multi-factor authentication when you're logging in to secure the system. So you're absolutely right.
So we have 3 minutes left, and then we'll be cutting into our break, but you might also have somewhere to be. We want to have you back, I think. And I guess the question is there anything you wanted to preview? Is there any time period where you thought it would be good to come back because you'll have a response to something or new data? Matt, of course, and both of you, we just didn't give you the opportunity to share report backs, things like that.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm assuming you'll want us back, and maybe Sarah to talk about workforce development
Yes. Well,
initiatives.
And UI and
And UI,
trust fund.
yeah.
I mean, I understand our added benefit of $60 a week for all claimants has kicked just highest bracket, just maximum. So it's gone up. It would have gone to 608 and it's gone to 668 as a result. It was at 583. Great. So that has actually happened, which would be nice. It was nice to finally learn that. We need an update on that. We need an update on aspects around it and on the trust fund and Matt's data, which we'd love to hear, which puts us all, paints such a good picture where we are.
I was just gonna add, so Matt's team he calls it going dark, but essentially for 2 months in February and March, they essentially look back over the last calendar year and true up all that data. So that may be a good time, sometime either within that or at the end of that, to have them come back to look at the last year
Right.
in review. We also have the trust fund report that will be coming out. And so that may be a good time to have us back to talk about the UI trust.
Is
fund.
that mid-January? Is that after?
The report itself is due the 31st.
Okay, so maybe first week of February, is that too ambitious? Second week? Okay, so
Perfect.
first week of February, we'll have you all back in the chair. Did you want to do something before that?
That piece. Well,
That's probably when we'll really open up the workforce development and labor chapter, because housing is gonna be.
and house, I think is.
Subject.
No, I realize, but just on the UI piece, because there's another piece on UI, the other COVID piece.
Yes,
PUA.
yeah, great.
PUA.
Yes. We need updates on,
That acronym I did not know.
Pandemic unemployment assistance. So it was one of the.
which was the
federal programs.
huge
The
Huge,
fun
took
one?
up a huge piece of our time
Yeah.
over the
It was,
last.
That's the one even people who
Yeah,
are.
so again, it was the most flexible of the federal programs. It essentially said if you were self-employed or an independent contractor, or if you could not work because of a COVID-related reason, you could receive benefits through that
Okay.
federal program.
So I'm going to ask over this month, Senator Clarkson, if you could be working with our DOL partners to figure out what else we do need to hear as a committee.
Yeah.
I think that'll still be the first week of February, but you can make sure we get everything we need. And we're asking for it.
I don't know, I'm not sure I can get everything we need from DOL, but I'm gonna work on it.
We will do our best.
Yeah.
And Chairman, congratulations on your new title and
Mhm.
role. Sounds additive, but we're.
Ditto to you.
Thank you. Thank you.
During one of my stints in here, Cameron was our legal counsel.
That's
That's right.
Yeah,
Let's counsel,
How
that's
far
where I
you've
began.
fallen. We're really grateful to have more of your partnership.
Yet another example, of we train them and the departments and agencies steal them.
That's a good thing. Think of them as plants.
It's not a-
Right, right, exactly.
It's a mixed thing, as you'll discover.
dealing with us just fine. Out somewhere.
Yeah,
So we'll be in touch,
Yeah,
but
great.
also we'll see you back here in.
Yeah, and if
early
there's anything
February.
you want or need to see in the meantime, we'll work on the one pager for proper payments and fraud and some of
yeah, the fraud piece.
But if you have other things that you want in the meantime, just let us know.
We'll try to give it a good chunk of time and add Sarah Buxton to the mix so we can really hash out all of the related topics. Thank you.